Hello and welcome to the Horti-Culturalists. I'm Stephen Ryan.
And I am Matthew Lucas, and we post every week on a Friday, so do hit subscribe if you want to follow our continuing horticultural adventures so that you too can become the expert that Stephen is.
Let's hope we're all like that one day. And don't forget that we also do shorts on a Monday, so if you've got a question, please put it in the column below. Tell me where you're from so that I've got context, and I will try and answer your horticultural burning questions in 60 seconds.
Now, Stephen, I am very excited as to where we are today.
Oh, yes.
Tell the viewers.
All right, we're in one of Victoria's most intriguing and fascinating nurseries called Roraima Nursery in Lara, and we're coming to meet Lyle, the owner, and he's going to take us through a really interesting group of plants as well.
And what are they? Are we going to reveal that now or not?
Oh, look, let's not keep people in suspenders. I would suggest that we are here to look at a group of plants, mainly from the African part of the world, and they're the Cussonias.
Aha.
So Lyle has a wonderful collection.
Now, just as an afterthought or a sidebar, we actually saw a beautiful Cussonia in the gardens of Melbourne University when we did a series there. So we will link that one below. And every plant that we mentioned we'll link below, and we'll also link a connection to the nursery here, so you can see exactly the wonderful things that we are about to see.
Yes, so let's go and meet Lyle.
Let's go. Stephen, I love this place, but as we're just off to meet Lyle, I can see we're sort of under a canopy of huge Cussonias.
Yep, they're everywhere and they're fantastic. So I'm sure he'll be able to tell us an awful lot more about them.
Okay.
Hello, Lyle. How are you today?
Very good, thank you.
Lyle, it is such a pleasure to meet you because I have come to this nursery so often and I'm very excited to be here. So thank you for having us.
You're welcome.
Lyle, you have probably the best collection I've seen of Cussonia anywhere in the country. Tell me a little bit about the genus though. I'm not overly familiar with them. So for a start, where do they all come from?
Cussonias is a fairly sort of extensive group of about 20 species. It comes from southern Africa.
Yeah.
And they range from smaller shrubs right up to quite substantial trees. And they can grow in a range of habitats from dryland rocky to foresty sort of conditions.
And have you got an array of those types in terms of the rocky ones, the more moisture-loving ones?
Yeah, in the nursery here we have a lot of different environments. So I've planted Cussonias in their relatively spots where they like to grow. So we have in the dry areas, we have Cussonia paniculata and things like that. And in the shady areas, we have Cussonia zuluensis like we have above us here, and spicata and other
Lovely
more
plant.
leafy green ones as well.
Okay, well we will at some point go and look at all of those in situ. So what's the one above us?
So this one's Cussonia zuluensis.
Yeah.
It's sort of a smaller growing variety, a bit more delicate, not as big and robust.
Yeah.
Very rich, deep green foliage. And this
It's
one
fabulous
here above
leaves.
us is going to its flowering structure as well. And Cussonias have a really unusual flowering structure where the ends of the branches actually branch into little radial stems as it flowers. So it's quite different. And then sometimes even after that, the branch can die back to a certain point and then reshoot lower. So it's actually quite a unique way of flowering for this plant.
Now for me, I've got one in the garden at home. It's all about me, of course. Just how cold tolerant would this particular one be?
So zuluensis, well, most of the Cussonias I would say can be cold but not frosted.
Right.
The only one that's probably the best for a cold situation is Cussonia paniculata. It's called mountain cabbage tree. So it comes from high altitude, which is more cold and frosty.
And it is in fact the one I've got growing quite well in my garden at
Yes,
Macedon. So there you go.
And did we mention, so where are they all from? It's an African
Yeah,
group.
African
African,
genes.
so southern Africa. So they range through quite a few countries.
Yeah.
So they're quite diverse because of that, from the different areas that they grow. But they mainly are known for being sort of, a dry, hardy sort of plant. So, good for drought-tolerant plants.
And of course they're known as foliage plants to a large extent. So they're bold and they're interesting and they stand out in a garden setting, don't they?
They're very architectural, yes.
And I've seen you've got some amazing ones in pots, so we'll cover the whole can you grow it in a pot question, maybe in front of one of those. But what is it about Cussonias that you love, Lyle?
Well, originally when I first was introduced to them, there was only like 2 species in Australia.
Yeah.
Paniculata and spicata.
Yeah.
And they were just big sort of chunky plants, tropical looking foliage, but not tropical, hardy, you can neglect them, they would grow. So they're just something that, was tough and hardy, but also when you put it in, it, made a statement.
Yeah.
And then from there, I was,
Hooked.
keen to see what other varieties there, and then able to, get other varieties and grow them on and introduce them into horticultural trade.
Fantastic. Now, just a quick question for our viewers, just to get an idea of hardiness. So in Australia, we don't have the same hardness zones that you do in the US. What would your winter minimum be here on average?
So we do drop down to about -2 Celsius, but
I'll put the Fahrenheit in.
later on. But it just becomes on the degree of frost, how long for, and whether they're repetitive or not. So I'll just say light frost, or put them in a frost-free position is better to be safer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that sort of also raises the issue for those people who are living in really cold areas. They probably will make quite a good house plant as well, won't they? Unless they push the roof off.
Yeah. So there's been a big resurgence for these sorts of things in indoor plants. So certainly Cussonias in the last several years in Australia, we are using them in big industrial installations and for big things that grow up big that can handle indoors.
Excellent. Well, I think we should go and see more of the collection.
Yes, well, what a good idea. We've only seen one so far, and I think we've got what? How many species?
We have
do you
9
think?
here in the nursery,
Yeah.
and some leaf forms as well.
Yeah, so nearly half the genus is all growing here in this nursery, which is pretty impressive.
Well, then let's go.
All right,
All
let's
right,
go.
okay.
Cussonia paniculata, and it's got the most remarkable root system. So that would have been a pot-bound specimen, essentially.
It's an old plant sitting in a pot that we had for a long time, and it was buried up to about there, but it kicked itself over.
Yeah.
And when we took it out of the pot, it had this marvellous convoluted root. So rather than sort of bury it again, we raised it up.
Oh, right,
To
yep.
show it off. And then from there, it starts off smooth, and then you get the fissuring or the cracking.
Yeah.
But they make fantastic bonsais. This has been in there about 15 years, totally neglected and doing well. But I do suggest that it goes in a dish-shaped pot.
All right.
So not a bowl shaped or something narrow at the top, because the roots swell up and they need to be able to push themselves out of the pot.
Otherwise they'll just explode the pot, won't
They'll
they?
put pressure in the pot, and then one day it'll go bang.
So because this is restricted in that container, this will always be a comparatively small plant. So it's almost bonsai for idiots, really, or you don't actually have to do anything particular to it. You just occasionally give it a drink, I guess.
Just give it, the regular watering, when it needs it. And the growth spurts are very reduced, so it's only a few little leaves.
Ah, right.
If it's growing in the ground, a growth spurt might be a whole metre of trunk.
Yeah. So what could this do if it was released from this pot? Could it in fact end up being a towering plant again?
Yeah, so if it got a root out of there, or you repotted it, it would then just take off and grow again.
Yeah. So they can make, in fact, seriously good pot plants.
Yes.
The other question I would ask, because this one's one of the silvery leafed ones. Now, normally when you see silvery foliage, you're inclined to think of something that wants full sun. But this plant is actually in a comparatively shady spot in your nursery garden.
Yes.
So can they go both ways?
We found that they seem to do very well in sun or shade. The growth rate will change, of course.
Yeah.
It'll be more etiolated or elongated
Yeah.
in the shade, more compact in the full sun.
All
but
right,
they do
yep.
both do very well. Their main requirement is they do like very good drainage.
All right, so drainage is important.
Perfect drainage.
Yeah.
The drier, the better.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. That's a fantastic plant, and it does show people that they don't necessarily have to end up with a forest giant.
That's right, you can have a collection in a small spot.
Fantastic.
Just following on from that amazing bonsai that isn't a bonsai, right above it is this amazing mature specimen. So which one is that? And we'll drop in the footage.
So this one's Cussonia sphaerocephala. So it's a large growing variety. Even though these look quite large now, they're probably only babies. They can grow to 25 metres tall, but quite narrow, so maybe up to 4 metres wide.
Because I was going to say, that looks like the perfect tree for small urban gardens, because it's quite vertical, not a huge spread, quite tolerant, but not if it's going to get to be a giant.
But there is different species, so you can find the right one for the area, whether it be 2 to 3 metres, 5 metres, or 10 metres plus.
There's a Cussonia for everyone.
It is, yes. It's just a matter of right selection.
Yeah.
But they give you what's called air height. So you can give a trunk with a whorl of foliage that gives you something up in the sky, but doesn't block all your light.
Yeah.
So it gives you, lets the sun come in, but still can have something up there.
So where do they sit in their native habitat then? What's the kind of forest environment? Are they an understory tree, or are they more in exposed areas with no other trees?
So because there's 20 different species,
They're all over
there's
the
some
place.
that are probably the dominant things, like the mountain cabbage tree, where they're the biggest thing in the open and high altitude.
Yeah.
You've got ones that are in forest, that's why they're tall and narrow, because they're running up to the tree canopy.
Yeah.
You've got ones that go in coastal sand dunes, which is a shrub that grows along the ground.
Wow.
So there's,
Do you have that one?
we do actually. So there's lots of different varieties.
Note to self, we need to look at that.
Yes. Yep.
Well, that's fantastic. And when did you plant this? How old is that one?
These have probably been about 15 to 18 years. Yep.
Wow. So, I mean, a longish period of time, but also not to basically have what to me looks like a mature specimen, but you're saying it's still a baby.
It's still a baby, yes. So sometimes they can, depends on the environment.
Yeah.
Some Cussonias could grow a couple of meters in a year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, without further ado, we should go and look at more. I want to see the creeping sand dune one.
No worries, yes, very unusual. You wouldn't know it was a Cussonia.
Okay, let's go.
Okay, no worries.
Now, we had discussed the fact that they get interesting flower heads on them, and they have a really weird sort of way that they flower. And we've got one above our head here. Explain to me what happens exactly, Lyle, when they come up into a flower spike, because all that wood eventually dies, doesn't it?
Yeah, so it's an unusual arrangement, I think, for a plant. So when it goes into its sort of flowering structure, often they have these big radial stems, and out of those stems come the flowers.
Yeah.
But that whole structure then can die back after flowering down the stem, and then the plant will shoot lower. So sometimes you think the plant's dying, or sometimes they go into a shaggy period and then recover afterwards. So you just got to be aware that when they do their flowering thing, it's not a normal flowering episode of a plant.
Yeah, so the thing though, I guess, is long term then, that piece of plant is going to die.
Yes.
So you wait until such time as you see where the shoots are coming from, and then you can cleanly take that dead piece out of the plant.
Above it, yes, that's right. Then you know where it's happy, where it's going to be shooting, and then you can go. If you cut too early, it may be more detrimental.
Ah, right. That sounds reasonable.
Now, is this the infamous desert creeper?
That's right, a coastal probably dryland creeper. Yes.
Can I make a rude observation? It's very vertical.
Yes. At the moment, where it's been propagated in pots, it seems to want to go up like a skyscraper.
Yeah.
But as a natural plant, it's more bushy and almost a ground cover. And we'll show you where it comes from, and then you'll get an idea what it's going to look like.
So you've got a specimen in the garden.
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
Because I was going to say, I would find it difficult to convince somebody that that is going to sprawl itself out across the ground.
Yes.
Most peculiar. So this one is Cussonia
Thyrsiflora.
So it looks quite different to the other ones we've engaged with. Its leaves are smaller. They're almost succulent.
Yeah,
to
very
feel.
leathery.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And it certainly doesn't look like a ground cover, but Lyle will prove it is.
And it's very bushy too, so it could be used as almost a hedge, I would think, in the right position.
And I guess obviously it stabilises sand dunes. That's its native habitat.
That's right. So it'll be in dunes with other sort of coastal plants.
Yeah.
So it's probably doesn't want to be up tall where it's going to get exposed. So if it creeps along through the natural vegetation, it's more protected.
Interesting.
Wow.
Cussonias keep on giving.
Yes.
Stephen,
All
I'm
right.
loving the Cussonias story.
Well, it is. It's a fantastic group of plants. And this one is in an old wooden barrel that's slowly disintegrating around it.
Yeah.
And apparently, by restricting the root system of some of these Cussonias, it actually makes them makes the bark more corky and fissured, so that you get even more interest out of your tree. And you can also keep it down to a reasonable size. So it's like I guess a giant bonsai.
And firstly, it does look like a cork tree
Yes.
bark. And secondly, quite a small pot for such a large tree.
Yeah.
It's quite amazing. I'm hooked. I didn't say this before, but I bought one from Lyle maybe 2 years ago, before COVID.
Yeah.
And mine is still thriving in a pot.
Yeah.
I forget which type it was now, which species.
Yeah. Well, you know, our friend Peter, the begonia grower, he's
Yes.
also got one in an old pot that he's had 20 or 30 years in the one pot. So
Which we featured in a video about the plant fair.
yes, the plant fair up at Wandon. So
We'll link that.
Yes, we can link that. And I have to say, there's something else that hasn't dawned on you just yet. So I'm going to have to tell you.
I'm bracing myself.
Yeah. You do realise that Cussonia is also in the Aureliaceae family. So it's in the same family
As ivy.
as ivy, and we have done our story all about Aureliaceae, and we didn't include Cussonia because most of them don't grow terribly well in my area at Macedon, so it's all a tad too cold and damp for them there, except for paniculata, which is doing all right. So we didn't actually include this genus in our Aureliaceae story, but this is basically Aureliaceae
Two.
Yes, so there you go.
One long hot summer.
Yes.
Well, I would not have thought. Well, there you are.
Yeah, so great and wonderful.
Okay, well, let's go and find Lyle and go on to the next.
What a good idea.
So Lyle, true confession, which I just confessed to Stephen, I have bought a Cussonia from you before we met. Now, if a punter comes in and wants to buy one, talk us through what's it going to look like and what should they look for?
Yep. So when they're young, they're often just a small sort of stout trunk.
Yeah.
Yep.
With a small head of foliage. Sometimes it can be a thin stem, sometimes it can be short and fat. This one's a paniculata, but with a paniculata you see like that, but with Cussonias they have more probably mass under the ground than on the top. And to illustrate that, if we take this out of the pot
There we go.
and we expose the base, you can see there looks like a big turnip.
My goodness.
That's the swollen root system. So it's actually a succulent.
Yeah.
And stores water and nutrients like a spud in its roots, so there's more mass under the ground.
Yeah.
But when we raise that out, that can become very barky and fissured, and also treated like a bonsai as well.
So you can in fact use that as part of the feature of the plant.
Part of the
It's
feature of the plant.
Not just about the foliage
No.
and what have you.
That-
So you can expose that bit.
A bit there, but also that's why it's drought hardy, because it can store water in there, and if all that mix dried out, it would still live on that for months.
Yeah.
Yep.
Often if you plant something too deep or too high, it's a negative or has a negative effect, but clearly not. If you're raising that up by, what, 4 inches,
Yeah.
5 inches?
It's not
10
going to be.
centimetres?
You're just probably a little bit careful with sun damage. Anything that you raise out that hasn't had the sun on it, you just be careful that the sun on it's not going to.
Oh, that's right. So
scorch
it
or
doesn't burn it. Yeah.
Um,
But it will harden up.
will harden up.
Yeah.
Yes. And with Cussonias, I will sort of always think when you plant them, probably don't water them in. Because when you're planting them, if you happen to ding the roots or damage the roots, they're better off just left dry to heal. But if you gave it a water, then it might rot. So when you're planting Cussonias, take them out, put them in, but don't water them for several weeks.
Yeah. Well, there you go. There's a very useful little hint for you out there.
You're more likely to rot them by watering them than not watering them at all.
Okay. And then finally, we've spoken about growing them in pots, but can they be grown indoors or do they prefer an outdoor climate?
Yep, so they're very universal plants. So outdoors in sun or shade, but certainly indoors in a well-lit position. They're actually making a good statement for the indoor plant trade, for something tough and also tropical looking that can grow well.
And cordexes, Lyle. But
That's
let's
another
not get
story.
into cordex.
Yeah.
Cordex,
I was going to
yeah.
say the other thing, though, if we're going to use it as an indoor plant, are there any don'ts or do's that people should be aware of? Like, for instance, say, how does it cope with things like central heating, air conditioning? How do the Cussonias?
Well, because their foliage is quite harsh foliage, it's not really a tropical sort of delicate thing like the tropical plants would be. It can probably cope a lot better.
All right.
Like any sort of bigger leaf plants, just keep an eye on things like scale insects. Once it's indoors, if there's an insect on it, it's going to multiply.
Yeah.
But you'll see, scale and things, just keep an eye on that as a pest. But apart from that, it's pretty sort of easy to grow.
So anybody can have one, even if you haven't got a garden. So there you go.
Yep.
Excellent. Well, I think we're going to go look at some more.
Okay,
Yes.
fantastic.
Well, Lyle, we're underneath another of your amazing Cussonias, and this one's quite tall. So which is this one?
So this one's Cussonia gamtoosensis.
Gamtoosensis.
So it's a greyish foliage one, but quite small leaflets and quite thick leaflets.
And this one's growing in a quite enclosed, shady aspect. So it's grown up, I guess, looking for the light.
Reaching for the light,
yeah.
yes.
And so this isn't necessarily characteristic of the plant if it's growing in perhaps a full open sunny aspect.
That's right. So this one's got a lovely upward branching and open branching habit. But if this one's growing in full sun, it'll be quite compact and bushy. And we can show you that as well.
Good. So we've got the other one.
Yeah. But yeah, the same plant, but two different habits depending on their growing conditions.
Fantastic. All right, Lyle, here we have another one, and I'm not familiar with this species, but you tell me that it's Cussonia nicholsonii.
Nicholsonii, yes.
And it looks like quite a shrubby one. How long have you had it here?
Well, this one's probably been in the ground about 10 years.
Yeah.
I think it's probably a small to medium grower.
Yeah.
But it gives you the green foliage, but in a lower form.
Yeah, and I do like the leaf shape. It's sort of, well, it's palmate, but then the individual leaflets are then lobed out to the sides, and it's quite a unique looking foliage. So
Yes,
it's quite an
very-
interesting one. Now, I've never seen this one around commercially. Is it available in this country?
Generally not. I got the seed many years ago.
Yeah.
And then we are slowly doing some small amounts of propagation.
Oh, good.
But
good.
it's probably the most in Australia is here in the nursery.
Yeah,
And then
right.
a few have been let go to just botanic gardens and things like that.
All right. Yeah, well, it looks like a fantastic plant. I think if it has this small compact habit all the time, it could be a very useful garden plant.
Yeah, definitely, to give you a shorter plant for a smaller garden.
Yeah, and it seems from what I've looked up on the net that it's very drought tolerant because it comes from sort of semi-desert binomes. So it would be a great plant for Australian conditions.
Yeah, for the drier landscapes where you don't want to do any watering, perfect.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think nicholsonii is rather handsome. I'm quite pleased to have made its acquaintance. No. All right, Lyle, this doesn't even look like a Cussonia, so what am I looking at here?
Yeah, so this one's called Cussonia natalensis, so it almost looks like a maple or a liquid amber.
Yeah, it's got that real look about it, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And it's quite a shrubby plant.
Yeah, very thin branches.
Yeah.
Quite bushy.
It gives itself away with its flowering spikes, though. You can see that there's the classical sort of dead-end flower spikes that will eventually fade off on it. Now, how hardy would this one be? It comes from Natal, I assume, so that's a reasonably cold area in southern Africa.
Yeah, this one's got the ability to be semi-deciduous, so at times when it's really cold during the winter, all the foliage can drop off and be bare and then grows again in spring.
Yeah.
If it's a mild winter, then it keeps its foliage. So it's probably, could be more of a cold hardy variety.
That's one I might have to have
Give it a go.
to add to my Raeleaceae collection at Mount Macedon.
Yes.
But yes, it's a completely different look. So it does give people an idea of the diversity within the genus. So I think this one's rather charming. And if you've got a spare one in the nursery, I might have to go home with it.
Might be one or two.
So
Yellow.
if it's deciduous, does it do any autumnal colour?
Unfortunately, not more than the normal yellow.
Oh, right. So it's not like a liquid amber in that respect. Oh, damn it. No. But anyhow, I think it's still a lovely shrub and I'd be very happy to give it a go. So natalensis, I think it's fabulous. All right, Lyle, what am I looking at here? This doesn't look like any of the others we've seen. So which is this one?
Okay, so this is Cussonia gamtoosensis, and actually we looked at that earlier as a tall, open-headed one.
Yes, in the shade.
In the shade, but this is the one growing in the sun. And you can see how the growing environment can change the habit. So this one's shorter and bushier because it's in full sun.
Fantastic. And it's obviously, it's got lovely greyish green foliage.
You see the new growth here, it's quite bluish.
Yeah, so it's really, really handsome. So you wouldn't have expected the one we looked at earlier to do this in just a slightly different habitat. I mean, it's in the same garden, so it's just a matter of the difference between sun and shade.
Sun and shade,
All right, Lyle, I'm standing under another Cussonia, and this one looks completely different. It's almost a monstrose form. So what's the species?
So these are Cussonia spicata, but they were seedlings that come up with a very highly dissected or laciniate type leaf. And I selected them out at the time wondering what they were going to do. Yeah. And kept them, but they've become a very unusual form of spicata.
Has it got to the point where it's producing any seed of its own?
No flowering yet. And it will be interesting to see what the second generation of seedlings will come up like.
Yeah, because unless you can get seedlings from it, you're unlikely to propagate it vegetatively, I should think.
That's right. You have to do cuttings to be able to propagate it.
Yeah. But if the seedlings do tend to throw a high percentage of the same plant, well, then you've got a selection, have you not?
That's right, yes.
Yeah, so I think that's quite fascinating. It gives it an almost feathery look, which the genus is not renowned for. So I think that's fabulous. So it's spicata, but different.
Yeah, well, we might call it Roraima form.
Sounds like a good move. Now, Lyle, this has to be one of the most intensely silvery blue Cussonias I've ever seen. So tell me about this one.
So this one's called Cussonia transvaalensis. So it's probably a larger growing one, but really glaucous leaves. So very reduced and very dissected, but really silvery colour.
It is, it's a wonderful colour. Now I assume since it comes from the Transvaal, it would be fairly drought tolerant, it'd be heat tolerant. The silver leaves always give plants away anyway as far as drought tolerance is concerned. But how cold tolerant do you think this one would be?
Yeah, it doesn't get damaged here in our mild frost that we have, but I would light frost, but I wouldn't go more than that.
Yeah, so this one could be something for me if I'm into zonal denial.
Well, if you've just got somewhere where you can just protect it a little bit, it may grow for you.
But it would still need some light and sun, and that's always the issue in a frosty area like mine. The areas I've got where I can protect things from frost tend to be under the canopy of trees where it's shady. So so it's going to sort of be damned if I do and damned if I don't potentially. Oh well, I'll just have to come and visit it down here on a regular basis. Now, Lyle, behind me here is one that looks quite different, and yet we've already talked about this particular species because we had some in the pots back in the nursery and they look quite different.
So this is the Cussonia thyrsiflora. So the one we saw was a big, tall, narrow spikes in the pot.
Yeah.
Where naturally it's a very bushy specimen. So growing in full sun.
Yeah.
You know, it's a very dense, bushy plant, and we talked about it being stoloniferous as well, which is growing along the ground as well.
Sorry, what's that word?
Stoloniferous.
Stoloniferous.
Yes, it has stolons, so it runs
We're learning
across-
something.
It runs across the ground and can root down as it goes.
Aha.
And the leaf shape has changed substantially from the ones in the pots. When you look at that, you can see it's much more divided and intricate. The ones in the pots had sort of basically just three leaflets.
Yeah, three big round entire leaves.
Yeah.
So is the whole leaf change thing though, from juvenile to adult, is that often about avoiding predators?
It can be.
Yeah.
Depends on the group of plants.
I'm
Sometimes it
thinking of Pseudopanax ferox.
Yeah, well, Pseudopanax ferox is a very good example of that because it can, in fact, completely change once it gets past a certain level, and it is thought to be due to predators.
Why does this one do it?
Well, who knows? It could just be that it has more energy as it gets older, and therefore it can make larger, more intricate leaves. There's all sorts of reasons why a plant might change its foliage from a juvenile into an adult form.
And it may germinate in shade underneath a bush and have big leaves to catch the light, but once it gets to the top of the bush, it doesn't need those big leaves and it reduces.
But I have to say, looking at this, I would have thought we were looking at a quite different plant back in those pots.
Yeah.
So it's
And
remarkably different.
I'm just intrigued by its habit. It's so different to all the others.
It's quite unusual compared to most Cussonias in the group,
Yeah.
so it is certainly a different looking plant.
Well, we've alluded to the fact that it's what is it called?
Stoloniferous.
Stoloniferous. So maybe we need to
There's
go.
the word of the day.
We need to go and have a chat about propagation.
Yes, what a good idea.
Let's go.
All right, Lyle, as we've been wandering around your display garden here at the nursery, I've noticed quite a number of self-sown Cussonias coming up. So that obviously happens in your garden quite a lot, and we've got an example of it right here in a pot. But if you're propagating them, would you collect the seed? Is that the way you would normally do it?
Yeah, so a lot of these plants were grown from seed originally from overseas,
Yeah.
but because we have such a big population within the nursery and large variety of plants, they're naturally seeding very well. But normally you would grow them from seed, and or they do have potential to grow from cuttings as well. They're a bit difficult, bit of a challenge. But the self-sowing in the nursery is probably due to the amount that we have here,
Yeah.
but also I think they need a bit of scarification. So they have like little purple berries, which are more attracted to birds. So the blackbirds here, which are introduced, eat them, and then by depositing the seeds around, they're germinating in places we water, like in pots or things where we're watering. They tend to be more prevalent to come up because they've got more of an opportunity to grow.
So it's not really a weedy plant. It's quite specific.
It's quite specific.
Yeah,
I think it
it's
will
not
need
going to go out into the Western District plains all of its own, is it?
It's only in a sort of garden environment where you're actually looking after a bit more. But it's certainly the paniculata is a bit more sort of coming up more, but the other species are quite rare.
Yeah. And how ironic that it's an introduced bird that
that is spreading the seed around.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
But now, just to backtrack about the cuttings, this is why God invented specialist nursery folk like yourselves, where people can come and buy the plants that are the manifestation of your expertise.
That's right. Well, it's taken many years of trial and error of working out how to grow.
Yeah.
So it's taken a long time to work out how to do it.
Yeah.
And sometimes you do batches of things and you get nothing out the other end.
Yeah.
And then you sort of got to think about, what have I done?
Or not done.
Not done. Try a different method. Try a different time.
Exactly.
And then that's the challenge of growing plants.
We're going to make a few films here, and it just is a paradise. It's a plant collector's paradise, Lyle.
Oh, thank you. Yep.
And you can exit through the gift shop. So basically, I mean, is it fair to say most things are for sale? You've got...
We try and propagate everything.
Yeah.
It may not always be available at that point of time,
Yeah.
but if you're willing to wait, then we will get back to and get one for you.
Oh my goodness, okay.
Yeah, so there we
you
go.
go.
Well, maybe we should go and do some shopping.
Maybe we should. Lyle, thank you so much for your time today. It has been such a delight. I love this place. It's great to meet you, the founder and grower of it all.
And I am really happy to be here again because it's stimulated my interest in a fair few plants that I've noticed around as we've been going today.
And they're going to have to fit in my car seat.
Yeah, well, they might have to fit in your car. And I, of course, will be back to see you shortly because I actually am going to help you to register your Cussonia collection with Plant Trust. So I've got to get the paperwork organised and then I'll bring it down and you and I can deal with it.
And if you want to know what we're doing next week, you'll have to hit subscribe.
Yes, and do join us because we're here every week. And don't forget our shorts, Every week we'll answer, or I will answer a question that you put in 60 seconds. So put it in the comments section below. Remind me where you come from so that we've got context, and I'm really happy to try and answer your questions.
Thank you, Lyle.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming over.
See you next week.
Bye all.
Bye.